Millionaire CEO's baby crying nonstop in a shopping mall until a black girl shocked everyone by silencing him instantly. You've seen crying babies before, but what if I told you this moment stopped hundreds of strangers in their tracks, humbled one of the most powerful men in the city, and changed 3 lives forever? Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how a single act of grace turned humiliation into hope. It started in the heart of Midtown, inside Skyline Plaza Mall, a sprawling palace of glass and steel where luxury stores lined marble floors polished to a mirror's shine. On Saturdays, it was always busy. Families browsing toy shops, teenagers laughing near the food court, couples drifting in and out of boutiques. But this Saturday was different. Because somewhere near the flagship Armani store, the sound that silenced all others rose like a siren. A baby's cry. Not a whimper, not a fussy squeak, a full-bodied, red-faced, soul-shaking scream. Heads turned, shoppers froze mid-step, employees glanced nervously toward the noise. At the center of it all stood Richard Langston, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and on magazine covers. At just 42 years old, he was a tech CEO worth nearly $4 billion, the kind of man who could buy entire storefronts with a swipe of his card. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that morning, polished shoes that cost more than most people's rent, and a watch that glimmered under the skylight like a miniature sun. But none of it mattered, because strapped to his chest in a baby carrier was his 11-month-old son, Theo, screaming as though the world had betrayed him. Richard's face, normally a mask of control, the same face that had stared down hostile investors and negotiated billion-dollar deals, was pale. His jaw clenched, his temples pulsed. He tried everything, a bottle of formula, a pacifier, a soft rocking motion. Nothing worked. The shoppers didn't see the billionaire who had been on the cover of Forbes. They saw a man unraveling, powerless against the one force he couldn't outspend, the relentless cry of his child. Whispers began. "Isn't that Richard Langston?" someone muttered. "The app guy, the one who bought out half of Silicon Valley," another said. "What's he doing here, alone, with a baby?" The whispers grew sharper. "Can he shut that kid up? This isn't a daycare, it's a shopping mall. Some people have no shame." Richard's ears burned. His assistant, Karen, stood beside him, frantic, offering suggestions. "Maybe the stroller, maybe the iPad, sir. I'll play baby music, Mozart for infants. That always helps." She fumbled with her phone, but the crying only grew louder, echoing off glass and marble. Theo's little fists clenched, his cheeks scarlet. He was inconsolable. And Richard Langston, billionaire CEO, master of control, looked like he might collapse. Because this wasn't just noise. This was his deepest fear, unraveling in public, that he wasn't enough. Not as a father, not without his wife. See, 3 months earlier, tragedy had struck. Theo's mother, Richard's beloved wife, had died unexpectedly in her sleep. Since then, Richard had been trying to juggle board meetings and midnight feedings, quarterly reports and teething fits. Some nights he succeeded. Today, in this mall, he was failing, and the entire world was watching. And then, she appeared. From across the food court, weaving through tables with quiet confidence, came a girl most people wouldn't have noticed otherwise. She was 23, in jeans and a pale yellow blouse, carrying 2 small shopping bags. Her sneakers were scuffed, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her name was Amara Johnson. To the crowd, she looked ordinary, just another young woman running errands. But Richard noticed the way she walked, not hurried, not judgmental, calm, purposeful. And when she drew near, her voice carried no impatience, no arrogance, only warmth. "May I try?" she asked softly, not looking at Richard, but at Theo. Karen nearly scoffed. "Excuse me, this is a private matter." But Richard didn't hesitate. His pride had drained with every decibel of his son's cry. He looked into Amara's steady brown eyes and gave the faintest nod. She stepped forward, arms open, not rushing, not forcing, just offering. And to everyone's astonishment, Theo leaned toward her. Amara gathered him into her arms with a practiced gentleness, holding him against her chest. She didn't shush him, didn't bounce frantically. She simply breathed slowly, steadily. Within moments, Theo's cries broke into hiccups, then soft whimpers, and then silence. The mall froze. The food court, the shoppers, the murmurs, all stilled. Forks hovered over plates. A child holding ice cream paused mid-lick. Even the fountain in the atrium seemed to hush. Richard stared in disbelief. His billion-dollar empire couldn't buy what this girl had just given him in 30 seconds. Peace. But it wasn't just about the silence. It was about who had created it. Amara wasn't wealthy. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes. She wasn't part of Richard's world. And yet, at this moment, she held the most important thing in it, his son, in her arms like he was hers. Some people watched in awe. A few even smiled. But not everyone. A man at a nearby table scoffed under his breath. "Figures, kids always calm down for the help." His companions chuckled awkwardly, not because it was funny, but because they didn't want to be the one to disagree. A woman whispered to her friend, "She must have been a nanny before. That kind of touch doesn't come out of nowhere." Others recorded quietly on their phones, already sensing this was a moment people would talk about. Amara ignored them all. She focused only on Theo, rocking him gently, humming a tune so faint only he could hear. His small hands clutched her blouse. His breathing slowed. His body melted into her arms, as though he had always belonged there. And Richard Langston, billionaire CEO, master of control, stood motionless, humbled by the quiet power of a stranger. For the first time in months, he let himself exhale. What the crowd didn't know, what Richard didn't know yet, was that this wasn't chance. This wasn't luck. Amara wasn't just some girl who happened to walk by. She carried her own history, her own scars, her own reasons for knowing how to hold a child's grief. And as she stood there, in the middle of Skyline Plaza Mall, silencing the cries that money couldn't touch, she was about to change the course of all their lives. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence in the mall was almost sacred, like a storm had passed and left only stillness. Richard Langston, the man who commanded thousands of employees with a single word, stood with his mouth slightly open, staring at the ordinary girl who had done what he could not. Theo, his baby boy, lay nestled in her arms, eyes closed, thumb slipping into his mouth, drifting toward sleep. The redness in his cheeks faded with every gentle hum Amara whispered. The crowd, however, didn't know what to do with this moment. Some people clapped softly, the way you might after a street musician finishes a song. Others smiled, whispering to their children about the kindness of strangers. A few rolled their eyes, irritated that the noise had disrupted their shopping in the first place. And then there were those who judged. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat leaned toward her husband, her voice sharp enough for Richard to hear. Imagine a billionaire relying on some random girl to handle his own baby? Pathetic. Her husband chuckled nervously, but didn't correct her. Richard's face tightened. Pride tugged at him like chains. He wanted to snatch his son back, to reassert control, to remind everyone he wasn't weak. But then Theo stirred, his tiny fingers curling into Amara's blouse, and Richard froze, because for the first time all day his son was safe. He cleared his throat, searching for words that refused to come. Finally, he managed, How did you do that?" Amara glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes babies don't need more noise," she said softly. "They just need someone to slow down with them." Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone that carried the weight of experience far beyond her years. Karen, his assistant, stepped forward with forced politeness. "We appreciate your help, but I think it's best if Mr. Langston takes his child back now." She reached out, but Theo whimpered, clutching tighter to Amara. A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers surged again. "He doesn't even want his own dad. Look at that, prefers her over him. Money can't buy love, huh?" Richard felt the sting of every word. His jaw clenched, but deep inside, a voice whispered something he didn't want to admit. "They're right!" Amara didn't move. She held Theo protectively, her gaze steady on Richard, not defiant, but not timid either. "He's not ready yet," she said gently. "Let him stay a little longer." It wasn't a request. It was a statement. And against all logic, all instinct, all pride, Richard nodded. The mall gradually returned to motion. People resumed shopping, though many kept stealing glances at the strange trio, the billionaire, his baby, and the ordinary girl who had silenced them both. Richard and Amara moved to a quieter corner near the fountain, where the water's trickling masked the last faint sniffles of Theo. For a moment, no one spoke. The air between them carried the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question, it was certainty. Amara hesitated, then nodded. "I used to volunteer at the children's hospital downtown, neonatal wing. Babies cry for a lot of reasons, fear, hunger, loneliness, but sometimes," her eyes lowered to Theo, "sometimes they cry because the world feels too heavy, and all you can do is carry some of that weight for them." Richard blinked, startled by the simplicity and depth of her words. Amara didn't add that she had once been a patient in that same hospital, that at 12 years old she had sat in a sterile room with her younger brother Daniel, who was fighting a heart condition. She had learned to hum lullabies not because she wanted to, but because Daniel needed it to sleep through the pain. She had learned patience by sitting through endless nights of beeping monitors, learning how fragile life could be. Daniel hadn't made it, but Amara's lullabies lived on. She didn't tell Richard this, not yet, but the way she held Theo carried the ghost of every child she had ever comforted. Richard studied her, unease flickering in his eyes. He wasn't used to silence. In boardrooms, he filled silence with authority. In negotiations, he bent silence to his will. But with this girl, this ordinary stranger, he couldn't. He wanted to thank her, but the words felt too small. He wanted to dismiss her, but Theo's steady breathing made that impossible. Finally, Richard exhaled, his voice lower than he intended. He hasn't slept through the night since..." He stopped. The words caught in his throat like shards of glass. Amara waited. She didn't push, didn't pry. Richard's hand brushed his son's tiny arm. His voice cracked. "Since his mother passed." The admission hung heavy between them. Not many people knew, not the tabloids, not the gossip blogs. Richard Langston had spent millions keeping his private grief out of the headlines, and yet here he was, confessing to a stranger in the middle of a shopping mall. Amara's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And for the first time since the funeral, Richard felt the words sink in, not as a sympathy card, not as an empty gesture, but as something real. Not everyone saw it that way. A group of teens snickered nearby, one lifting his phone to capture video. "Yo, billionaire daddy can't handle his own kid. Look at him leaning on some random chick." Karen snapped at them to leave, but the laughter lingered, echoing like an accusation. Others, though, looked on with quiet respect. A middle-aged mother murmured, "She's a natural. Reminds me of when my own kids were small." An older man whispered, "Maybe money doesn't raise children, love does." It was a strange trial by public opinion. Half the mall judged Richard for weakness. The other half admired Amara for strength. And in the middle, Richard felt stripped bare, exposed in a way that billions of dollars could never shield him from. As Theo drifted deeper into sleep, Amara adjusted her hold, careful not to wake him. "He'll be fine now," she said softly. Richard's throat tightened. He should take his son back, reclaim him, reassert control. But something stopped him. "Stay a little longer," he said. The word surprised even him. Amara looked at him, surprised. "Why?" Richard swallowed hard. "Because right now, he trusts you, and I don't want to break that." It wasn't an easy admission. It was the kind of vulnerability Richard Langston never allowed himself. But as he spoke, a strange thing happened. He felt lighter. Amara nodded once. No victory in her eyes, no judgment, just understanding. For the first time that day, Richard realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. He didn't have to do this alone. For a long time, the fountain's trickle was the only sound between them. Theo's small breaths rose and fell against Amara's chest, soft and steady, the kind of peace Richard had begged for and failed to find for months. But peace never lasts long in public. A man in an expensive golf shirt strutted past, his phone angled deliberately toward them. "Billionaire meltdown in the mall," he muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "Wait till the tabloids see this. Richest man in the city, can't even handle a baby." A few people laughed. A couple even snapped photos. Richard's cheeks burned crimson. His instincts screamed at him to fight back, to call security, to threaten lawsuits, to remind them who he was. He opened his mouth, but no sound came, because deep down, every mocking word carried truth he couldn't deny. Amara saw it in his eyes, the same helpless shame she had seen in countless hospital parents who couldn't fix what was broken. And before Richard could spiral further, she spoke. "Do you think money changes the sound of a baby's cry?" she asked, her voice cutting through the whispers. The man in the golf shirt blinked, caught off guard. Amara didn't raise her voice, but her words carried. "Pain sounds the same whether you live in a mansion or a one-bedroom apartment. Loss feels the same whether you wear diamonds or hand-me-downs. And love?" She glanced down at Theo. "Love is the only language a baby understands. That's not wealth. That's presence." The crowd stilled. Even those recording hesitated. Richard looked at her, stunned. No one had ever spoken on his behalf like that. Not board members, not assistants, not even friends. She wasn't defending his title. She was defending his humanity. And for the first time, he realized how desperately he needed someone to. Richard cleared his throat, trying to gather composure. "You speak like someone who's lived this." Amara's eyes flickered. Hesitation, then honesty. "I have." She shifted Theo slightly, keeping him snug in her arms. Her gaze drifted, as if replaying memories on the polished mall floor. "My little brother, Daniel, he was born with a heart condition. We spent more time in hospitals than at home. He cried constantly,
Nothing soothed him, except when I hummed. Doctors, machines, money, they couldn't fix him, but a simple song, sometimes that gave him peace. Richard listened, the mall fading around them. He didn't make it, Amara continued, voice steady but fragile. I was 12 when we lost him, but I learned something in those years, that sometimes the smallest gestures mean the most, not because they fix the problem, but because they remind someone they're not alone in it. She looked at Richard then, directly, without fear. You're not failing him. You're just grieving, and so is he. Her words struck deeper than any headline, any insult. Richard felt the sting of tears, a sensation he hadn't allowed since the funeral. For months he had drowned in silence, burying himself in work, masking his brokenness with deals and figures. But now, in the middle of a shopping mall, a stranger had unraveled his armor with a story about her brother. As if sensing the shift, Theo stirred. His eyes fluttered open, wide and curious. For a moment, he blinked at Amara, then turned his gaze toward his father. Richard hesitated, afraid the crying storm would return. But Theo reached out, a tiny hand, chubby fingers stretching toward him. Richard's breath caught. Slowly, carefully, Amara transferred the baby into his arms. Theo whimpered once, then pressed his face into Richard's chest. No screaming, no thrashing, just quiet acceptance. The crowd, still gathered, seemed to hold its breath. The billionaire held his child, but not like a man clutching to prove a point. He held him like a father rediscovering what that meant. Amara watched, with a faint smile curving her lips. See? He doesn't need perfection. He just needs you. Richard's throat tightened. And you, he admitted. Theo's little hand reached back, patting Amara's blouse as though claiming her too. The moment was small, almost invisible, but to Richard it was everything. His son wasn't choosing one or the other. He was choosing both. For the first time, Richard didn't feel like he had lost control. He felt like he had gained something he didn't know he was missing. Connection. Whispers changed. That was beautiful. Did you see how she calmed him? Money couldn't do it, but kindness did. Even the skeptics fell quiet. The man in the golf shirt lowered his phone, embarrassed. The mall that had once mocked Richard now seemed to soften, recognizing the humanity in the scene. For once, it wasn't about the billionaire. It wasn't about the scandal of a crying baby. It was about a father, a child, and a stranger who bridged the gap between them. Karen approached cautiously, her tone subdued. Sir, we should head back to the car. The board meeting... But Richard cut him off, his voice firm. Cancel it. Karen blinked. Cancel a meeting with the investors? Yes, Richard said, cradling Theo closer. For once, they can wait. It was the first time in his career that he had ever put anything before business, and as he said it, the weight on his chest felt lighter. Amara tilted her head. You're choosing him. Richard looked down at his son, then back at her. No, I'm choosing us. Amara didn't know what that meant for her, but she didn't need to. In that moment, she had done her part, given father and son back to each other. But Richard wasn't about to let her walk away. Not this girl who had silenced his son's grief and his own in the same breath. And so, in the middle of Skyline Plaza Mall, a billionaire CEO learned a lesson money could never buy. That power means nothing if you can't hold your child, that grief is lighter when shared, that sometimes the person you least expect, a girl in worn sneakers with a lullaby in her heart, can change your life forever. Theo's cries had once filled the mall like a storm, but now his quiet breaths echoed louder than applause. And for Richard Langston, the most valuable deal he ever made wasn't signed with ink. It was sealed with trust, with love, with the hand of his son reaching for him, and the kindness of a stranger who reminded him what truly matters.